Cardell Orrin. I'm the Memphis director with Stand for Children. With Stand for Children, we are an education advocacy organization that works with parents, community members, educators to get them involved in supporting education and efforts that we think will lead to better results for kids and help them move towards college and career post-graduation. There's a base of Memphis work that is how do you move a community forward that has such a rich history and long history of challenges in terms of equity, in terms of race, in terms of wealth gaps, especially for the African American community. And so education becomes a real issue and challenge of how do you make changes in that culture and in that community. And so I think for Memphis, it is a question of how do you move forward? The majority of populations is African American and in a hyper-segregated community, residentially, from an economic standpoint, and that education is one of the ways that and levers that we have to change the current state, to try to make a place that is better for everybody, that has more equity and builds wealth and I guess a culture that means that everybody can enjoy success. Segregation is an issue in education because of the core piece of how education was started and public education was started. Especially in Memphis, it becomes a big issue because as soon as they created and started to say, okay, we're gonna do this busing, Plan Z busing, to desegregate the schools, you had 40,000 white kids flee the Memphis City school system into private schools, into suburban schools, and building up those school systems. And so then it becomes a question of, well, what do we do because of that? The ongoing question of whether integration is the only way to improve and create a better education system, or there are other ways to create equity where we can serve kids even if other parts of the population don't want to be in a unified school system. So it really, I think that the major issue facing us is just making the decision that we want what's best for kids, and we're going to throw everything else out of the window, out of the room, and focus on this is the best thing for kids, and let's move forward with these efforts. I don't know if we've learned our lesson from Dr. King. I think that we still struggle with wealth gaps in our community, especially for African Americans. And so I think that it's still something we have to learn in Memphis, that we haven't decided to invest in education and support the development of young people, that we haven't necessarily decided that we want to create equitable situations for African American owned businesses and women owned businesses to create equity of economics and wealth. And so I think that the biggest impact has yet to be seen as we learn the lesson that Dr. King tried to teach us. We haven't created the community that he dreamed of opportunity and of people who have access to the things that create successful Americans and successful citizens. So I think that, he would say there's still work to do. I think he'd still focus on what's the next thing? How do we change our circumstances? How do we build a community that is just? I mean, if you look across the board and say, are we, a just society in wealth? Are we a just society in education? Are we a just society in justice? In the way that we think about criminal justice, I think the answers, the data, the facts would say no, we haven't reached that level. So I think that he would say there's still a lot of work to do. We know that if we accept the status quo and that we don't change a culture, that we will end up with the same results. So my hope is that as we go forward, that we change because we know what it means not to change. And we know that we can change laws and we can change society. And Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement changed those laws, it changed society, but we didn't keep our eye on the prize. If we don't realize that things just don't happen, people just don't all of a sudden treat people right. They just don't all of a sudden, make decisions based on the content of someone's character, not the color of their skin, that hasn't happened. We've got a history that shows that it doesn't happen. And if we aren't, making very specific decisions and putting in place parameters that make sure that we make equitable decisions, it won't happen. if the next 50 years are like the past 50 years, I think, my hope is that there's inspiration, that people don't give up. You don't change. My mother has been an activist for a long time, over 50 years, 60 years. And, I continue some of the things that she fought for are fights that I continue and get involved in. And so it's a shame that we haven't changed enough, where I have different fights to fight than she fought, 40 years ago about education. But again, that's something that we have to take up and decide that there's a torch to carry on, that, there is change that we can create and that we can make, and we do it in sometimes different ways. And, try to position it in different places to say, okay, well, let me try to learn from that. And maybe there's a different approach that we can take. So let's try this approach. And let's do this a little bit differently, but like learning from the past that we have. So my hope is that if we don't have change, that my daughter will decide, okay, this status quo, the current situation is not acceptable. And so we have to change that. And we won't just accept what is, but we will still think about what could be and fight towards that end that we think is the community that we want to live in.